I want to thank my colleagues, Senators Murray, Stabenow, Durbin, Smith, Wyden, Cantwell, Hirono, Cortez Masto, and Blumenthal for being here, and then the so many great groups that are with us here and have been by our side, and we've been by our side through thick and thin. And we're always going to be together, and we are going to win. So I want to thank everybody. And on Sunday, what should have been the celebration of the 50th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, America mourned instead. America mourned. We mourned the fact that millions of women and girls now have fewer rights than their mothers and grandmothers. We mourned the loss of individual freedom. We mourned the loss of a woman's right to choose. So on Sunday, which should have been a day of celebration, was a day of mourning. Last year, after decades of plotting and insidious efforts, the MAGA Supreme Court stripped millions of women of the right to abortion, putting the power to make personal health care decisions firmly in the hands of MAGA extreme Republicans. Immediately after the Dobbs decision, Leader McConnell threatened a nationwide abortion ban, meaning no one in any state is safe. And Senator Graham proposed concrete legislation to do so. This was a clear message from MAGA Republicans to women across the country. Your body, their choice. Women's bodies, MAGA Republicans' choice. How awful. How un-American. And what did the House Republicans do right after they finally got through their dysfunctional leadership fight? They continued their anti-abortion attacks with extreme legislation that intimidates and threatens doctors into not providing abortions and would make abortion access even more difficult than it is already. So that's not just rhetoric. They're trying to pass legislation. The American people rejected this type of extreme MAGA Republicanism in the last election. The American people said hell no to efforts to undermine abortion access in the country, as the last election showed. America is on our side completely, if you look across the board with what people think. The contrast is clearer than ever. Democrats will keep fighting for women and the right to choose, while MAGA Republicans keep pushing to make abortions illegal nationwide, try to punish women and doctors, and even push bans with no exceptions for rape or incest. But we are the bulwark. What they are trying to do will not pass, will not stand. We will not let it happen. Absolutely. And when the American people voted for a Democratic Senate and even increased our number against all odds, they were saying, protect women's rights, and we will. We stand. Senate Democrats stand with the American people and with American women. Senator Murray.
Well, thank you, Mr. Leader. 50 years ago, when Roe was first decided, I remember thinking about my friend who needed an abortion before that decision was made, and she could not get a safe one. And I remember hoping that stories like hers would be a thing of the past, and they should have been. On Sunday, we should have been commemorating 50 years of Roe. 50 years of women having the constitutional right to make their own health care decisions. Instead, it marked the first anniversary since Republicans overturned Roe, dragged us back half a century, struck down a constitutional right for the first time in our history, and passed ban after ban after deadly, dangerous abortion ban. It has now been exactly 7 months since the Supreme Court overturned Roe, and the months since have been really hard. They have been heartbreaking, and the healthcare crisis that followed has been horrific. In just a few months, Republicans have ripped abortion rights away from over 20 million women and overruled women's own decisions about their lives, their bodies, and their futures. But looking at this group gathered here today and looking at what happened in November, where voters backed abortion every single place it was on the ballot, I can't help but think, you know what? I did not get into politics because things were going great. Everyone who stood up and used their voice over the last many months didn't get into this fight because it was easy or comfortable. We got involved because there was too much at stake to stand on the sidelines, and the stakes have never been higher. Right now, in this country, our daughters and our granddaughters are growing up with fewer rights than I did. Right now, because of Republican bans, women are facing miscarriages and have been unable to get the care they need for days on end. They've been left bleeding, getting sicker and sicker, and pleading for help. All while doctors are being forced to compromise medical care, leave patients in pain, and even forego providing life-saving care because they fear far-right politicians will jail them for doing their jobs. And if that weren't enough, Republicans have investigated a doctor for providing care for a child who was raped, proposed funding to jail people for abortions, talked about using existing laws to prosecute women who get abortions, and made it harder for patients to get birth control and even the treatments that they need for really serious issues like cancer. And I'm infuriated that anyone could look at this nightmare, look at the healthcare crisis this has caused, look at the suffering women have been forced to go through and think, you know what we need? We need more abortion restrictions. Seriously? Yet that is one of the first things the Republican House voted on. One of Republicans' top priorities is forcing women to be pregnant, no matter their circumstance, no matter their wishes. And we know the end goal, a national abortion ban. It is no secret. Well, here's my message to Republicans. The fight for abortion rights didn't end 50 years ago when Roe was decided, and it did not end last year when Roe was overturned. We are not giving up, and we're not going anywhere. My Democratic colleagues in the Senate and I will not stop fighting until every woman in America once again has the right to control her own body and her own future. We are going to be a firewall against House Republicans who every attack on our rights. We will block the outrageous bills they send our way. We are going to keep putting forth common sense legislation to protect our most fundamental rights and to restore Roe once and for all. And we are here to say the American people are with us, and reproductive rights are on the agenda this Congress. Democrats are going to keep fighting for women, fighting for patients, and fighting for the right to abortion. And we are going to win. With that, I will turn it over to Debbie Stabenow.
Thank you very much, Senator Murray and Senator Schumer. It's great to be here on a beautiful, sunshiny day with all of you to make it very, very clear where we stand in terms of making sure that every single person in this country has the freedom to make their own reproductive choices, period. And the Senate Democratic Caucus is going to make sure that that happens. We all know 50 years ago last Sunday, the Supreme Court handed down the Roe v. Wade decision, and for 50 years we had that freedom in this country. And now that national protection under the Supreme Court is gone, and young people have fewer freedoms than their moms, their grandmas, and that others that came before them. Well, I'm proud to say that in Michigan we decided to do something about it. That's not okay. And so we put together a ballot proposal that was overwhelmingly supported, over a 13-point margin. People voted in Michigan to make sure that their own health care decisions, which they know are personal, are made by them, and that we are standing up for each other and what needs to happen in terms of protecting reproductive rights. So the bottom line, it really is that this is about you, it's about each of us to make our own decisions. It's not about right-wing politicians, it's not about right-wing judges. It's about, in America, having the freedom to make your own reproductive health care decisions, period. That's what this is about. And we're going to stand with all of you to make sure that we can do everything possible to protect that freedom. I want to now introduce somebody who's on the front lines of doing that through the Senate Judiciary Committee as chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee, where we have confirmed in the last 2 years 97 new judges. And so, Senator, where are you? Senator Durbin, yes.
Thanks, Debbie. 50 years ago, Justice Harry Blackmun, who had been the general counsel for Mayo Clinic in Minnesota, sat down in that building just across the street and wrote the decision in Roe versus Wade. He was tackling an issue which had not really been directly addressed by the court in a long time, if ever. And he tried to strike a balance to guarantee a constitutional right to access to abortion and reproductive health care, and based it on a trimester system. I'd have to really think hard if there was any decision handed down by the Supreme Court that was investigated so carefully, so closely, so often, reinterpreted by court after court, state after state, legislatures addressing it. You have to go back to cases like Dred Scott, Plessy, and Brown for a decision that was so carefully scrutinized for so many years, 50 years as a matter of fact. It wasn't until Donald Trump appointed 3 MAGA Republican justices to the Supreme Court that the bottom fell out and the pendulum swung on the court to eliminate Roe versus Wade. And in one fell swoop, Justice Alito turned this over to the states, and we know what happened since. Some 24 different states have either banned or severely limited a woman's access to reproductive health care. What's going to happen to those women? They're not the richest people in the world, many of them. They struggle to get by. And they may be faced with the prospect of trying to make a trip to some state that still is protecting a woman's right to choose. It's a hardship, it's a problem. But other things are going on too, which are equally concerning. I know Senator Wyden will address this. There are efforts underway in these states to make it even more difficult, if not to ban the abortion procedure. There are efforts underway to figure out a way to limit a woman's access to legally dispensed prescription drugs and over-the-counter medications. There are efforts underway to track women as they travel and come close to a clinic for assistance and to hold them legally liable. Is that your vision of America? It's not mine. My vision of America is Roe versus Wade. Taking a controversial issue and coming up with a reasonable approach to it that guaranteed a constitutional right and said the decision is ultimately to be made by the woman and her physician and her family. That is the way that should be. We come today determined to continue this battle. I will just tell you, the Republicans have got it wrong. They've had it wrong for a long time, and they happen to believe that they're on the right side of history. The last election proved that they were not. When the women across America reflected on what they had lost in the Dobbs decision, they were activated and energized to be participating in that election. I don't think it was a one and done. I think the women of America and their families are willing to fight again to bring Roe versus Wade's principles of the constitutional right to reproductive health care back as a major issue in the United States of America, as it should be. This time I'd like to introduce from Minnesota, the home of Justice Blackmun, Senator Tina Smith.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Durbin, and thanks to all of my colleagues and to all of you for being here. Good morning. When I worked at Planned Parenthood, I used to dread the anniversary of Roe versus Wade. On that day at our clinic, the anti-choice protesters would be in front of the doors to our clinic with their ugly signs and their cruel messages, and the women in Minnesota would have to walk through that line in order to get the basic health care that they knew that they needed. And now here we are 50 years after Roe, and Roe is no more. And we have seen the consequences of that for people and for their providers, the chaos that that has caused in the healthcare system, the damage that it has done to people, to women seeking out the health care that they need, providers who find that they have to talk to their lawyers before they can make decisions about the best health care for their patients, women who are faced with traveling across state lines, who are faced with postponing needed medical care because of this ridiculous situation that we're in. And why is this happening? This is happening, as Americans now understand, because extremist Republicans decided that they knew better than women whose lives and stories they will never know what kind of health care they needed. That is unacceptable in this country. And the voters of this country agreed. When we had this last election and pundits and others suggested that abortion rights, abortion freedom, reproductive freedom was never going to be a salient issue for voters, we saw that that is not the case. So here in the United States Senate, we are going to continue to fight in every way that we know how to protect and expand reproductive freedom, including abortion. We are going to do everything we can to make sure that people have access to medication abortion, which is the way in which over 50% of Americans are now getting access to abortion care. And we're going to do everything that we can, and especially we are going to fight to stop the abortion bans that we know the Republican Party is hell-bent to put into place. That is the work ahead of us. I'm proud to stand with these incredible allies and healthcare providers who are working on the front lines to try to protect the health and the freedom of women and people everywhere in this country. And now I am very pleased to be here and proud to introduce next to you my colleague, Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon.
Thank you, Senator Smith. And my colleagues have said it well, and I'm going to be very brief. The bottom line in America is every single day, right-wing men are trying to claw back women's right to privacy. And the fact of the matter is, America is already seeing the dangers of a post-Roe country. Patients are having difficulty getting the care that they need. Doctors are frightened about the possibility of jail time for doing their job. And when a woman searches for health care information on their computer, they can have that weaponized against them. In our part of the world, people have taken to calling it uterus surveillance. And the problem is there just aren't any rules with respect to tracking people's private and personal information. And it's why in a minute I'm going to have a chance to introduce Senator Cantwell, who is the chair of the Commerce Committee, is our leader on privacy, and it's a pleasure for our whole caucus to work with her. One last point that I would make, though, and that is you are going to get one big dose of hypocrisy in this whole debate. For many, many months, we were hearing all this talk that this would be a states' rights issue. It's all going to go back to the states. And I've joked with Senator Durbin about it in the past. Some of these Republicans think states' rights is basically only if you agree if the state is right. That really is their kind of approach. So after all those months of claiming it was going to be a states' rights issue, what do we hear? A big shift to a national ban. We'd open up our newspaper and we'd see our Senate Republican colleagues strategizing for a national ban. So you can't make this stuff up. It's all there, plain and simple. I have the pleasure of introducing our privacy leader, who's going to be so essential in this area of protecting women's rights, my friend, Senator Cantwell. By the way, you've got 100% of Oregon and Washington's United States senators pro-choice on this issue, and we're very proud. Senator Cantwell.
Thank you, Senator Wyden. In November, Republicans, Democrats, and independents made it clear it was not okay to overrun the rights of women, override the rights of women in the United States of America. They made that clear. And now it is time for our Republican colleagues in the United States Senate to join us and pass a federal law that protects a woman's right to choose in every state in the United States of America. We're not going to just have the House of Representatives continue to demean the health care services of women in America. Even though I come from a state that has long protected Roe v. Wade in our state statute, the Supreme Court ruling has affected our state's health care delivery system. It has affected patients and doctors even in our state. For example, after Roe v. Wade fell, Planned Parenthood in eastern Washington reported a number of patients from Idaho jumping up to 78%. This is now an ongoing crisis for our state's reproductive health care system. People in Idaho are not going to stop getting pregnant, and they are not going to stop seeking the best medical care. They are going to cross our borders. Not only are women coming from Idaho, they're coming from Texas, they're coming from Florida, where governments have decided they will take away the control of a woman's body. This is likely to mean fewer available reproductive health care appointments, longer wait times, and especially the trying incidents of people trying to continue to strip those rights away and put pressure on medical professionals not to deliver this care. Some states are now imposing penalties or jail sentences on doctors who perform abortions. Our medical providers wonder if their own health insurance will be subject to challenges because of the cost of continuing to providing these cares. They should not be penalized just for providing this help. We need safe abortions. We need women to make sure that in every part of the United States they can get access to the health care they deserve. We are continuing to hear from constituents all over our state about the delays in access to care, the challenges that they are facing, and the scrutiny that even they get when they are trying to make sure that access is there and available. The United States Senate needs to act. We are not going to play defense. We are going to play offense. We are here to stand with these organizations to say to our Republican colleagues, it's time that they stand up and help protect a woman's right to choose. This is a constitutional right to privacy that previous courts clearly outlined and was settled law for 50 years. The only unsettling thing here is that Republicans think they can get away with it. I'm now going to introduce my colleague from Hawaii. Actually, I'm going to introduce my colleague from Nevada, a champion on this issue, our great advocate, Senator Cortez Masto.
Thank you, Maria. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I will be brief. I am proudly from a state that so strongly believed in Roe versus Wade that we codified it in 1990. That's how important it is for the people of the state of Nevada. And I say Nevadans because this crosses party lines, it crosses gender. 2/3 of the voters in 1990 voted to codify Roe versus Wade in the state of Nevada. And if you poll voters today, 2/3 still support it. And that's why I'm here. So many people during this past election, Republicans, Democrats, men, women, came out outraged at what we saw the Supreme Court doing when they repealed Roe versus Wade in this country. And so for Nevadans, this is an issue worth fighting for. And let's be very clear, and Ron Wyden, my colleague, pointed this out, this is hypocrisy at an extreme level by extremists on the far right who want to wrap and cloak themselves in the flag and the First Amendments, run around talking about due process, liberty, and equal protection, but only when it suits them. Because this is clearly about personal freedom. And if you do believe in those freedoms and due process and civil liberty, you are going to support and fight for individuals' personal freedom, particularly when it comes to health care in this country. It is hypocritical, and they're not done. We see it every single day in the state of Nevada, women coming to our state for their health care needs. And now we have our extreme Republicans trying to block women from traveling to my state and trying to criminalize those women and those doctors who in my state have supported the right of women to choose. So hypocrisy is on the extreme with these far right, including the idea that this is a states' rights issue. Because if they truly believe that, they would not be blocking my state, who had made the decision to support women and doctors in my state, and they would not be on a path to criminalize them. That's why I have introduced the freedom to travel for women for health care in this country. That also protects our doctors from providing the essential health care to women in need. We will continue to fight in the Senate And believe me, it's not just the Senate. It's not just those of us in Congress. It is a majority of the American public that believe in what we do. We are on the right side of history. We are on the right side of freedoms for women in this country and so many others. And that is worth fighting for, and we are not done. So I am proud to stand with my colleagues here, to call it what it is, hypocrisy from the far right extreme, and continue to stand with so many across this country who believe in personal freedoms. And so I am proud to join my colleagues and continue this fight. And now let me introduce to you my incredible colleague who's been on the forefront of this, Senator Dick Blumenthal. Thank you, Dick.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, the home of Griswold versus Connecticut, the first case by the United States Supreme Court on the right of privacy. I want everyone to remember how you felt when Dobbs came down. I want everyone to remember the hurt and anger. Hold it in your heart. And to the men of America, this cause is your fight too. It's not a women's issue. It is a human issue. Women's rights are human rights. And Dobbs demeans your rights as much as it does any women's rights in America. Republicans are on the wrong side of history, they're on the wrong side of the law, and they are on the wrong side of the politics here. I ran for re-election last November, as did many of my colleagues. Reproductive rights were an issue, not just any issue. They were a defining issue. You are going to drive yourselves into a smaller and smaller minority in the United States Senate and the Congress because you reflect a smaller and smaller minority among the American people. The American people believe in the right of privacy, the right to be let alone when making personal decisions about your own body. I clerked for Justice Blackmun in that building about 50 years ago, in the term right after Roe v. Wade. Dobbs would have been unthinkable. In fact, the debate today would have been unimaginable back then. But here we are. And when I wrote and introduced the Women's Health Protection Act 10 years ago, Dobbs would have been unthinkable and unimaginable. But today we need to unite against these efforts that would control, criminalize, and dehumanize women in a way that should be unthinkable and unimaginable in the United States of America. So we're going to continue fighting. Make no mistake, the Women's Health Protection Act, the Right to Travel Act that Senator Cortez Masto is championing, these measures are not going to be accomplished in the next 2 weeks or the next 2 months, maybe not even in the next 2 years. I'm very clear-eyed about this cause. But we're going to keep fighting. And I will tell you, as I stand here in the shadow of the United States Supreme Court and the Congress, the Women's Health Protection Act guarantees will be restored as the law of the land because it is America. We are better than Dobbs, and we will be better because of the enormously important advocacy by groups like Planned Parenthood and NARAL, and I have the great honor to introduce now the head of NARAL. Senator Hirono, whom I just left in the Judiciary Committee.
That's why we're both here now, because we're from the same
And an absolutely steadfast and eloquent advocate. In all seriousness, I'm very honored to be here with Senator Hirono. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. We should be standing here celebrating the 50th anniversary of Roe, but instead, We are here fighting for a person's right to control their own body. Abortion is a really important issue to me. You know, there are teenagers all across the country awakening to the fact that they no longer control their own bodies. And abortion was the first issue in which I wrote to my members of Congress in Hawaii asking, what is your position on abortion? I was in college at that time. And I wanted to know because Hawaii was the first state in the union to decriminalize abortion. So this was a big issue in our state legislature. And the person who carried that bill to make abortion legal in Hawaii was a very strong practicing Catholic. And the governor who allowed that act to get into law was a very strong Catholic governor who went to Mass every single day. So this should not be, you know, an issue based on religion. So here we are, right after the Supreme Court overturned Roe, which I have to say the advocates of abortion, they really stayed the course for 50 years. But right after that, 26 states eliminated abortion care, and there are other states that would like to do so. And state legislatures all across the country have mobilized, and the extreme Republicans would like to make it that much harder to control our bodies. And they're not just trying to ban abortion, but also to go after contraception, including emergency contraception. 9 states have taken steps to restrain emergency contraception. So it's not enough that they are making it that much harder for us to control our bodies by being able to get an abortion, but we can't even get emergency contraception in these states. Everyone should have access to not just abortion and control of our own bodies, but to emergency contraception, and that is what is happening all across the country. And as I said, there are young people awakening to the fact that they have fewer rights than their mothers, their grandmothers, and they are going to mobilize just as I was mobilized around this issue, and we will continue to fight for a person's right to control their own bodies, bodily autonomy. Mahalo, everyone. Is there anybody following me?